Hi, my name is Ron Paul, and I had the good fortune to serve 12 terms as a U.S. Congressman. During that time, I tried to connect the dots and give you a clear picture of what's going on in our country. And I made life difficult for countless bureaucrats who built a career on concealing the truth. As far back as 2002, I warned Americans would become poorer and more dependent on the government to put food on the table, that the erosion of civil liberties would continue under the false flag of national security, and I spoke of an impending real estate meltdown and financial crisis. Some in Congress tried to laugh off these predictions, but despite their attacks, each of them has come true. Half of all Americans born today will wind up on food stamps at some point in their life. The government is hacking into our cell phones, our emails, and credit card records. The average American has only saved about $25,000 for retirement. And millions of investors and homeowners are still trying to get back to even after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. To the untrained eyes, these problems appear to be unique. Poverty, a looming retirement crisis, civil unrest, and the cost of living spiraling out of control. But as you'll see, they all trace back to a single bad decision, something the politicians in Washington have attempted to sweep under the rug. And if I'm right, it will trigger the next great collapse far worse than what we experienced just a few years ago. That's why I've recorded this message, to explain the final prediction I made in Congress, what it means for you personally, and how you can protect yourself. I hope you can take the small sliver of time that remains for what it is, a gift and final chance to take matters into your own hands before it's too late. We're living through a strange time in history where the old rules, hard work, perseverance, and frugality don't seem to apply. On one hand, the average American standard of living has never been higher. We have more gizmos and gadgets than you can shake a stick at, and more choices on ways to feed, clothe, and entertain ourselves than ever before. Yet many Americans, no matter how hard they work, find it almost impossible to get ahead. And even the more fortunate among us are worried they may never be able to retire. Does this sound right to you? Well, for an increasing number of us, it's stark reality. And when I tell you what I believe is going to happen next, chances are you'll have a hard time believing me. That's okay. At the very least, you won't be caught off guard when events take a turn for the worst. Don't worry, you don't have to be an economist to understand how we got into this mess. All it takes is a look at your pocket change. You see, I was born in 1935 during the Great Depression, and I can still remember walking with my brothers to a local store. We each had 4 or 5 copper pennies and got a small bag full of candy. Today, the penny is so worthless, a lot of folks in government want to get rid of it. Indeed, the new zinc penny on the right can't even buy a penny. It costs the government nearly 2 cents to make one of them. The same thing is happening with the American nickel. Today, it costs the government almost 10 cents to make a 5-cent nickel. That's why the U.S. Mint lost more than $100 million on these coins last year. How has this happened? Well, it's a sign that my final prediction, the complete destruction of our currency and our monetary system, is about to come true. The warning signs are obvious if you know where to look. You'll probably notice how social unrest is on the rise, how college graduates have found themselves burdened with trillions of dollars in debt, how the cost of health care has continued to soar to the point where the average retiree must save $275,000 simply to cover their basic medical expenses, or how it costs 2 cents to make a penny and then 10 cents to make a nickel. These are signs that money as we know it is quickly losing its value and will soon cease to exist. This may sound like an outlandish claim, and it's something you won't hear at all in the mainstream press. It seems unimaginable to most people that the dollar could soon be rendered worthless. But reality paints a different picture. Since the government began its experiment with paper money, our currency has lost 95% of its value. In other words, what's used to cost $1 at the store now costs $21 and counting. Most Americans and nearly every politician I met in Washington don't realize that this is happening. but it's the root cause of why so many find it so hard to save for retirement. It's why pensions have become a relic of the past and why so many pension plans are underwater. It's why a single medical procedure or unexpected bill could tip millions of Americans into bankruptcy. It's why millions of mothers have been forced to work full-time when they'd rather stay at home with the kids. And why a full shopping cart at the grocery store can easily set you back $200 or $300. When I was in office, I tried to warn people, especially the elderly and those approaching retirement. I told them, look, you're always going to get a check from us. You're always going to collect Social Security, and the amount you receive will rise over time. But the question you have to ask, what's that money going to buy? If the price of electricity doubles, your check is not going to double. As the price of food continues to rise, the small increases in your check are not going to compensate for that. Just imagine paying $7 for a gallon of regular gasoline, $20 for a burrito, $11.50 for whole milk, $14 for a small tin of blueberries, $71,000 for a no-frills new car, $430 a month for cable and internet service, $718 a month for electricity. If things continue as they are, that's where prices are heading. But I fear we're on the edge of something much worse, an event that will cause the dollar to lose all its remaining value almost overnight. Congress is totally unprepared for such a crisis. You see, most people in Washington don't understand what money is or what determines its value. I'll never forget the time I was in a Financial Services Committee meeting not long ago, and one congressional member leaned over and asked me, "Isn't the U.S. dollar backed by gold?" True story. Amazing, isn't it, that some of the people making important decisions about our money don't even know that the U.S. has not been backed by gold or anything for that matter for more than 40 years. They're so busy giving away money and so happy to fund every new program and sustain a military presence in 140 countries that they've never stopped to think what will happen when the money goes bad. Just imagine what our world will look like when the food stamp program grinds to a halt, when grocery stores refuse to accept credit cards, when the people who run Medicare decide a once routine procedure is now too expensive and turn you away from the hospital, and the banks are forced to close and ATMs run dry. Get ready, it's coming. And really, we don't have to imagine what it might look like. We know because it's happened several times throughout history with the same result, disaster. In the Bible, you can find it under Genesis 47:15. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread. For why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed." It happened in Germany in the 1930s. Paper money was made so worthless by the central bank that people literally burned the currency as fuel to heat homes. It got so bad people went back to the barter system. They left the cities to go out into the countryside where they could search for food. In some places, the poverty and famine were so bad people had basically returned to the Stone Age. The same thing has happened in recent decades in Argentina, Ukraine, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe. And as we speak, it seems to be happening in France, Australia, Canada, Russia, and Japan. Over the past year, their currencies have collapsed anywhere from 17% to 50%. A 50% decline in a currency is the same as a 50% pay cut. Imagine how badly most Americans are struggling today. Then imagine what will happen when your money only buys half as much as it used to. We think we are immune to such a calamity, but I assure you we are not. The government has simply chosen to bury its head in the sand and pretend this is not happening. But mark my words, it's happened. In 1775, colonial leaders lacked the funds to fight the British, so they issued a new paper currency called the Continental, which quickly lost its value. George Washington famously noted, "A wagon load of currency will hardly purchase a wagon load of provisions." In 1862, the government of the South issued a new paper currency, which quickly lost its value. By 1865, just 3 years later, a simple pair of shoes cost as much as $600. Each of our previous experiments with money backed by nothing has ended in tears, and now it's about to happen again. The fact that our government can simply order trillions of dollars to be printed out of thin air and distributed to anyone it likes should terrify us all. This is how it orchestrated the bailout of Wall Street. $400 billion to bail out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. $280 billion to save Citigroup. $142 billion to Bank of America. Do you remember paying a special tax to save these firms? Of course not. If the government asked us to pay for all this out of our pockets, there would have been riots in the street. So instead, Congress asked the money factory, otherwise known as the Federal Reserve, to print up the cash. Trillions of dollars worth. So far, it's worked. The vast majority of Americans have no idea what's going on or how it is hurting them personally. We get paid in dollars. We spend them at the store. They seem to have real value, but this illusion is rapidly falling apart. How could the dollar be strong when roughly 75% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck with essentially zero savings, according to a recent study by Bankrate? How can things really be normal when the number of people on food stamps has basically doubled since 2009, and when half of all children born today will be on food stamps at some point in their life? And how can we possibly trust the dollar as a store of value when our country's money supply has increased by 400% since 2008? All just printed out of thin air. Look at this chart. It should scare the heck out of you. What has taken place over the past few years with the U.S. dollar is something straight out of Weimar Germany, or the last 20 years in Zimbabwe. I've been told on more than one occasion by high-ranking politicians the American people are too stupid, they'll never figure this out. Somehow, they think it's perfectly fine for you to lose 95% of your spending power. That you should be happy to get to keep 5% of what you earn over time. I disagree. That's why I've rushed to record this message. So far, every other prediction I made has come to pass. Now, my final prediction of a dollar collapse is about to become reality. I can't tell you the precise day or month it will happen. It could be any moment now. And one thing is for sure, you will never see an official warning from the government. The only question is, will you act before it's too late? You may think I'm being dramatic, but during my time as a congressman, I had the chance to talk with some of the most high-powered men and women in government about this very issue. Many of them agreed with my predictions and were much more candid with me than they ever were with the general public. I once rode alongside President Reagan on his helicopter Marine One, and the subject of what's happening to our money came up. Ron, the president told me, no great nation that abandoned the gold standard has remained a great nation. I've also confronted Alan Greenspan, the famous Federal Reserve chairman, on this subject. And he told me he still stands by his original thesis, which was published decades ago. He wrote, "In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value." It's frustrating how both Reagan and Greenspan refused to admit the truth in public while they were in office, but I believe history will prove both of them correct. The government has fooled people for a while with paper money, but it's inevitable distrust in the money will be lost. It doesn't take a genius to see. The last 10 years have taught Americans to accept for the first time that their standard of living will fall short of their parents' and grandparents'. This has led to a growing sense of frustration and anger. More and more Americans have resorted to crime to compensate for losses they see as unfair. Inevitably, this crisis will lead to political instability and violence and financial collapse. Without a doubt, it's the most frightening thing happening in America. It's my most dire prediction to date. That's why it's important you take steps to prepare. I don't work in Congress anymore, but I know for certain that you can't wait for Washington to fix these problems. Real monetary reform will come only after a major currency crisis has already done its damage. You've got to take action personally. You must get the facts for yourself. You must learn the steps necessary to protect yourself and your family from the next inevitable financial crisis. You must become familiar with the warning signs and the government's predictable response to the crisis, which will likely make matters worse.